Chapter 7. From Punta Arenas to Ushuaia, through the Fuegian Channels. Ushuaia, December 28, 1897. After spending a fortnight at Punta Arenas, restocking and refitting the ship, studying the surrounding regions, and accepting the warm hospitality of the citizens, we tipped our anchor at midnight of December 14th. We then set a course almost due south for Famine Reach. The little gunboat Toro, detailed by the Chilean officials, escorted us for several hours. The early part of the night was clear, which permitted us to see Sandy Point, with its glittering sheet iron houses, for a long time. In the morning, we were off the northern shore of Dawson Island. From this time until we reached Ushuaia, the weather was extremely unsettled. Cold rains, drizzling fogs, and sweeping squalls of wind were the normal weather conditions. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we anchored in Hope Harbor, a snug little cove at the entrance of Magdalen Sound. We soon assembled in small companies and went ashore to explore as best we could the regions about. Everything here had for us a special interest, for, in a scientific sense, all was unexplored. There were glaciers, unsealed mountain heights, unknown water depths, and a savage wilderness of land, with gold in many streams. We should have enjoyed a prolonged stay here, but for the time, for exploration in the more icy south was already far advanced, and since this was the principal part of our work, we must hasten to it. The afternoon was given to examinations ashore. The narrow beaches were lined with mussel shells, and in one place there were 2 beehive-shaped frames of old Indian huts. There were a great many birds about, but we saw no large life. Where the land was so exposed that the vegetation was sheltered from sudden squalls of wind, here called willywaws, there was a forest of large beech trees, and under these there was such a rank profusion of underbrush and moss that it was difficult, generally impossible, to force a passage. Near the open blast of the regular winds and the willywaws, the land was mostly barren of trees, but covered by a thick, velvety carpet of wet moss. It rained and snowed nearly all the time we were ashore. We came back with our boots full of icy water, our clothing torn, soaked, and hanging to us like wet leather, and our heads bruised. We had made some notes and some studies, but altogether our personal discomforts were such that we were ready to throw science to the dogs. He who attempts to properly explore this region will find conditions to try his patience nearly as bad as at either pole. On the following morning, we steamed through Magdalen Sound. The scene was desolate, but wildly beautiful. The westerly banks rose out of the waters with an easy slope, terminating in low hills of polished stones. The ravines, the gullies, and the shoreline were covered by a dense growth of stunted beech. The uplands, where soil and rooting surface was possible, were carpeted by heavy sheets of moss. The easterly banks, though far more barren, were of greater interest to us. 9 glaciers poured their crystal currents down from the majestic heights of Mount Sarmiento, which was draped in a white mist. The glaring whiteness of these glaciers, separated by black, weather-worn, dome-shaped mountains of solid rock, made a scene of rare delight. At 11 o'clock, we rounded Cape Turn. Then the interesting polished rocky slopes of the banks and islands of Cockburn Channel lay before us. Here, we felt the disturbing influences of the airs coming out of the Pacific. A violent puff of wind struck us as we passed each break in continuity of the mountains, and this was followed by a rain squall and a choppy sea. We were indeed glad when we turned our backs to this region of battling storms to enter the less dreadful channels eastward. At 6 o'clock, we were amid a labyrinth of uncharted islands in Whaleboat Sound. Severe storms came here also, and these, with frequent clouds of fog and increasing darkness, made navigation uncomfortable and dangerous. At midnight, we dropped anchor on the eastern bank of Basket Island. But the bottom was rocky, and both the wind and the sea were too dangerous to remain. So at 3 o'clock in the morning, we started again to plod along as best we could. The chart was so imperfect that we were compelled to pick our way, as if exploring regions entirely new. We counted not less than 20 islands, which we could not find on charts. It would have also been interesting to also linger here and explore this locality, but we had a stronger interest ever pulling us onto regions farther south. As the sun rose and we advanced further eastward, the atmospheric conditions were such that rainbows, complete and in fragments, were in the south and west almost constantly for several hours. The bows were generally arched over a chain of islands touched by bands of green and brown and gold, and altogether the effect was full of delightful color and fascinating harmony. At noon we anchored at the eastern end of Whaleboat Sound in a small bay on the northern shore of Londonderry Island. Soon after dinner we went ashore to bag specimens for the laboratory. The land around the bay is about 1,000 feet high, rising rather abruptly from the waters, but the mountain crests are everywhere accessible. As we landed, we found close to the waterline a number of old Indian fireplaces with great heaps of mussel shells about. These were the sites of ancient Indian huts. The lowlands were covered by a thick meshwork of vegetation, mostly mosses and grasses. In sheltered places there were a few beech trees, but the tallest were not more than 15 feet high. We had not ascended very far when we found everywhere evidences that the whole land had at one time been covered by glaciers. Massive boulders were seen in lines, and all the rocks were polished and scratched in a typically glacial manner. There were many lakes which marked the beds of old glaciers. Before dark, we came down from the heights with our bags full of specimens and our notebooks full of observations, but our clothing, as usual, was wet and torn. Near the shore, we built a campfire, and then tried to dry our clothing and extract such comfort out of life as Indians in a similar position do. I think it was Darwin who said that the people of this region did not enjoy any of the comforts of home. Certainly, he never built a fire in a cold, drizzling rain and sat beside it to eat his lunch. If he had, he should have learned to enjoy the first comfort of the home of primitive man. We spent a few days in this neighborhood, visited a glacier, then steamed through the northern arm of Beagle Channel to Ushuaia, where we anchored late in the evening of December 21. After breakfast on the following morning, we went ashore. The manner of our going was a matter of some anthropological interest. It portrayed our developing disregard for formality and our resignation to the savage life to which a constant force of circumstances drove us. At Rio, we were done up in good style before we left the ship, dress suits when necessary, the newest thing in neckties and neatly pressed trousers. At Montevideo, our garments were crinkled and showed the effects of the sea. We began here to be a little indifferent in personal appearances. At Punta Arenas, we did not even try to fix up, but walked about the town as careless of dress as bricklayers. And here at Ushuaia, well, the man who dressed and brushed his hair was an outcast. He was not regarded as an explorer. Ushuaia is a small town of about 25 sheet iron houses, built at the base of the terminating hills of the Cordilleras. The background of the town is savagely picturesque. Two chains of mountains run eastward, parallel to each other, along the southern border of the main island of Tierra del Fuego, and these mountains give the surroundings of Ushuaia a remarkably wild but pleasing effect. The town has in itself very little of importance. It is a military and convict station for the Argentine Republic, and at present there is a pier in construction from which vessels can coal. The government of the Argentine Republic, with commendable liberality, offered us coal and supplies free of cost at their stations. At La Pataya, a neighboring town, the Belgica remained a week to coal. At Ushuaia and at Harborton, we took in our last supply of fresh provisions. We were indebted to the Argentine government for the kind treatment at her hands, and to Mr. John Lawrence and Mr. Thomas Bridges, now deceased, and their families for valuable aid in furnishing supplies and help in making Indian studies. It will not be possible to give more than a passing notice of our work among the very interesting tribes of Indians in this region. The anthropological observations, measurements, and vocabularies will be given separate publication. For the rest, the reader must be content with a few notes on the Onas.